actually a conventional process that happens in different jurisdictions around the world. So Australia is still yet to grapple and answer the question of the concept of recognition. In Canada, for example, there is treaty processes underpinned by constitutional recognition. In New Zealand, there is the Treaty of Waitangi. That is a treaty. It is a foundational document of New Zealand. However, New Zealand doesn't have a structural problem like we have with a written constitution. There's also other forms of recognition around the world. If you look at Scandinavia, there are also Indigenous parliaments. So in each of the dialogues, there were different models of reform debated, and the five of those are a statement of acknowledgement or a preamble, a racial prohibition clause, a head of power or amending section 5126, a voice to parliament, and agreement making. The Fraser administration established a Senate inquiry whose report was titled 200 Years Later, a report by the Senate Standing Committee on Constitutional and Legal Affairs on the feasibility of a compact, or Makarrata, between the Commonwealth and the Aboriginal people, delivered in 1983. The Hawke administration sought to respond to the Barunga Statement with a commitment for a treaty or compact at the bicentenary of 1988. Prime Minister Keating said in his Redfern speech, I quote, "How well we recognise the fact that, complex as our contemporary identity is, it cannot be separated from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples," in his Redfern speech. Howard, again, before his election in 2017, committed to, in his own words, "I believe we must find room in our national life to formally recognise the special status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples." As we move to where we are closer to now, Turnbull dismissed the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and he dishonestly labelled it a third chamber. And now we are going through this concept of co-design with the Morrison administration. It seems like at every turn, it's politicians who continue to put hurdles in front of the people. That is why the strategy with the Uluru Statement from the Heart was different this time. It was issued directly to you. It is only the people and the power of the people that can get us to a referendum and for that to pass. The Australian people stood with us in 1967 and they will stand with us again on enshrining a voice to Parliament. We should not let politicians continue to diminish our hopes for a better future. The first day of dialogues and those debates that happened in each of those locations saw a lot of our elders and leaders speak about truth. And indeed, if you're a blackfellow and you go to any blackfellow community, mob are speaking truth straight up. What happened in the dialogues was that the first day had to be totally embedded and added to the dialogues because truth-telling emerged strongly. Elders spoke about how they're survivors of massacres. Elders spoke about how they're survivors of stolen generations, still without reparation. Elders spoke about the impact of invasion, where their communities and their youth are still experiencing suicide at record rates. There was a sense of powerlessness on people's own country. The ongoing injustices and discrimination of colonisation in this country must be heard. But truth cannot be heard without structural reform. There have been many commissions in this nation, there has been many reports written, and there has been many recommendations made, and they have gathered dust without accountability and enforceability, which is why a voice was ranked first in the sequence of reforms. There is a real need in this country for effective mechanisms that entrench the many voices of First Nations, not just those that are the loudest. So the process that had been underpinned was guided by 10 principles. And I will go through these 10 principles because in many ways they shape my campaigning and advocacy from here on in. At Uluru, there were 10 guiding principles distilled. First, that any reform must not diminish Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sovereignty. That it must involve substantive structural reform, that it must advance First Nations' right to self-determination under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that it recognises the status and rights of First Nations, that it tells the truth of Australia's history, that it does not foreclose on future advancement, that it does not waste this opportunity for reform, that it provides an effective mechanism for First Nations with respect to treaty, because there will be many treaties in Australia. There won't be one, and there is a real need to build a national framework, and also that it has the support of First Nations and must not interfere with any current legal arrangements. Now, I will end very soon, but I just did want to touch on, many of you have probably heard about the current co-design process that the Minister for Indigenous Australians has established. Despite that process happening, I urge you all to continue to push for that voice or that detail to be put to a referendum. Again, do not let the government diminish our hopes with respect to that. No dialogue that I put up on the board had endorsed any current structure with respect to being a representative voice for their nation. One of the things that's occurring now is the co-design is going out and looking at what is already existing. So we must be brave enough to reimagine that First Nations can reimagine their own voice and speak for themselves. Now, I do want to end with, despite the difficult path we have had in the last 2.5 years, where there's been no money for the campaign, it's been completely dismissed at each turn. However, the power is in this room. No matter how big or small your act is in taking up that invitation, it's been so important in keeping the Uluru Statement from the Heart on the political agenda. Each of you must be an activist in some way to get uncomfortable with your comfort in this process. And I urge you to walk with us, because this is an opportunity to rewrite our nation in this moment in time. May you.
So I was a wharfie when I was 17 years old in Darwin, and I spent 16 years as a wharfie before I became elected as the leader of the wharfies and seafarers and divers, the Maritime Union in the Northern Territory. And I worked with some colourful characters, as you can imagine. Brian Manning was one that I'll mention. Brian Manning was a leader of our union that didn't, one of many that didn't hesitate to support the Gurindji struggle. When the Gurindji people walked off Clayfield Station for equal wages, better conditions, and then for land rights and self-determination. Brian was one of those leaders that would travel between Darwin and Dargarogu, where the Gurindji people set up their community, a community of their own determination, and took supplies for that 9-year strike. And And so learning these stories about from these elders in the union movement, and learning about how also in South Africa, the apartheid regime, our seafarers, and I acknowledge as a comrade here, a seafarer, a life member of our union, we put a ban on any ships that were to carry oil to the apartheid regime, which became an international action that put a huge amount of pressure on the apartheid regime and helped to topple that disgraceful way that the people were treated there. I mean, these were lessons in unity, but also lessons in the leverage of unity. And something that makes me really proud to be a unionist and an MUA official is that we didn't use that unity just for our own wages and conditions, but we also used that unity for those that were struggling most in our communities, for social justice. And so when I became an official with this background, I was able to continue that tradition. And as a Torres Strait Islander, I was most proud and most passionate to organise community actions around our issues. And one of the issues that we organised around in Darwin was the community closures in 2015 in WA, the way that the WA government was closing down, shutting down services and trying to remove our people from country in that way. The disgusting way that the youth were being treated in detention at Don Dale and being shocked about that with everybody else in the country and organising the action in response to that. And so as a unionist, was that this unity and our advocacy was missing something. Because what I learnt on the wharf through those struggles, I was on the wharf in 1998 through the Patrick's dispute, the power that we had came from the structure that was so well established. Our union has existed for over 100 years. We know who our representatives are. We can come together regularly, work out what's in common and then go forward and campaign for those things. And so what I started to realise was missing was that. And it was good timing because it was around that time I was invited to be involved in a constitutional dialogue in Darwin. And I learnt about this process that was to come. I came in a bit later than Teela. I met Teela in the 2016 trial dialogue. And I learnt that these 13 dialogues around the country, with the well-informed way that they were run, designed by an Aboriginal woman, a Copple woman, Professor Megan Davis, an expert in public law and constitutional law, the first Indigenous person elected to a United Nations Permanent Forum. These well-designed dialogues, well-informed, with a formula applied, 100 participants, the formula to capture a cross-section of the community, 60% traditional owners to get that cultural authority in the room for the region, and that they would culminate in the heart of the country at a sacred place like Uluru. Learning about this process with my background, I was thinking this was a great opportunity for us to build power through a consensus. And I didn't think that opportunity should be wasted. I was elected out of the Darwin Dialogue to go to Uluru. And Uluru was a wonderful experience. So many of us went there with great hope. But there was high tension as well. In all of the dialogues, there was tension because we have different views, right? We came from different places. When we came together in the heart of the country, we were from all parts of the southern sky. The different impacts of colonisation depending on where we lived and where we were from. The different levels of healing. Our different political views all came together. And because constitutional recognition had been discussed for so long and people like John Howard and Tony Abbott had supported this symbolic form of constitutional recognition, which, as Teela pointed out in the Kirribilli statement, was rejected. And had been rejected in Victoria as well before the Uluru process began. Because of all of that time that this had been discussed and we had never been asked, there was also tension around that. There was this distrust for constitutional recognition. People didn't believe that this was being controlled by us. And so when we came together, that was something else we had to overcome. I mean, Professor Megan Davis said at the start of these dialogues, she asked us to suspend our disbelief that we could change our situation. So when we came together at Uluru, on the second day, around 20 of our people walked out straight into a media scrum and said that they weren't heard in there. There was around 270 of us in there before then. Some people were immediately saying, what we believed was vindicated. These blackfellas can't bring it together. They can't come out of here with a consensus. I mean, what crap. We are supposed to have 100% consensus. I mean, look at the decision making in every other forum in this country. Look at Parliament, what a disgrace. To expect us to have 100% agreement on the way to move forward on big picture reform, the rule book of the nation, no less, the Constitution, that is to dehumanise us. So what was really important was those people had their say, our mob. They had a position, they tried to leverage their position. But around 250 of us remained in that room and finished that day's discussions. And on the last morning, the third morning of that convention in the heart of the country, Professor Megan Davis stepped up to the podium and she read the Uluru Statement from the Heart for the very first time. And I want to share this with you because it is something that I will never ever forget. It's etched into my heart and my mind, and along with the importance of the proposals, it drives me on this journey. When she finished reading the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the entire room stood as one and endorsed it with standing acclamation. Not one person remained seated in that room that morning. Some of those elders that had been in passionate debate against one another, embracing each other, crying tears of joy and hope that we had reached this consensus. Now I'm going to recite the Uluru Statement to you now, and I hope that you can feel what I felt that morning. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This, our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with their ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That a people's possessed the land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional change to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our own destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk into wells, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is a culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967 we were counted. In 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Thank you. The broken promises, all those recommendations, all of those statements and petitions that gather dust in the halls of Parliament having not been achieved. That is where those words come from. And they're powerful, and they're eloquent. And this beautiful artwork here, it's a canvas about this tall and as wide as my arm span. It is a powerful historical document. It's sacred. It should be celebrated forever. And what must happen as a practical person is that what it calls for must be achieved. It calls for those three things, and Teela mentioned them, and I talked about my background because I want you to understand that the voice is about unity. It is about us being able to choose our own representatives that are accountable to our own people, that can come together, determine what's common, understand what we differentiate on, and go forward and change things. And it must be constitutionally enshrined, because the lessons from the past is, every time we build a strong voice in this country, it is smashed by the whim of Parliament. And therefore we must fight for constitutional enshrinement of this. And that is where the battleground is right now. They're doing the co-design process that Teela talked about, but they're saying they will not underpin it by the Constitution. That's where the battleground is. And so this is a people's movement. The Makarrata Commission is about truth-telling and agreement making. They can legislate that tomorrow. They haven't done that either. But I want to really make sure it's understood how important the voice is to truth-telling and treaty making. The truth has been told for a long time in this country. History books for a long time have been saying what the truth is about the genocide, and all those other things that have happened to us. The truth has been told for a long time about the present situation, most incarcerated people on the planet, the suicide rates. The truth has been told in royal commissions, joint select committees, Senate inquiries. Truth needs a voice. Truth needs a strong enough political voice that can drive through the changes that must come from the truth. And for treaty making, a lot of people around the country in these dialogue processes said they want treaty. They want a settlement, they want an agreement, they want reparations, they want whatever a First Nation decides they want to go for in a treaty. But we're in a federalised system. Treaties are already happening. Victoria, Northern Territory, where I'm from, treaty processes are started. Queensland. But in a federalised system, we need a national representative body that can strongly negotiate the framework and the federal government's obligations to whatever outcomes come in the states. So it's really important. After Uluru, people like Teela Reid, many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders, people that stepped up, didn't take no for an answer. Teela famously took on Malcolm Turnbull Anyone see that? Didn't take no for an answer. And we've fought for this, and I've got to say thank you to those that have been supporting this for the last 2.5 years, that are in this room. We have moved the government. They dismissed it so out of hand, so disrespectfully, back in 2017. But a voice is on the agenda. But that battleground, as I said, is a constitutional enshrinement. Please consider buying the book. It is all of the author royalties go to the campaign. There's Teela's story in there and many others. You'll get a better understanding of it all. I hope that you will walk with us, and I'm not going to walk out of here without proposing an action to conclude this, because I am doing this. But I printed out 100 letters to the Prime Minister and the Minister for Indigenous Australians. And it basically tells them that they need to change their mind about constitutional enshrinement. And you can just put your name and your electorate, sign it, and send it off, and let's bombard them with our views. Yeah.
Thank you. Ready? Yep. I'll say. You ready, mate? What do we want?